Jackson, Mississippi, 1957. The sun was hot and cruel, casting long shadows over dusty streets and sweltering silence. But in the backyard of the Turner house, beneath the wide arms of a blooming magnolia tree, the world felt gentler. That's where Ruby first saw her. Clara Belle Freeman had come to work as a helper for Miss Eleanor Turner, a wealthy white woman who needed someone to sweep, sew, and carry her garden baskets. Ruby, the cook's daughter, already knew the rhythms of the house, the stairs, the unspoken rules. She wasn't expecting Clara to shatter them. Clara had smooth, dark skin like polished mahogany and a voice like low thunder. She didn't speak unless necessary. When she did, people listened. Ruby was 17, shy and small, always in the kitchen with flour on her cheek and a world of poems stuck in her head. Clara was 19, fresh from Biloxi, where her daddy had taught her to read the blues on a cracked guitar. She was different, strong, defiant, unknowingly magnetic. Their first conversation was short. "You always wear yellow?" Clara asked, watching Ruby hang laundry. Ruby smiled, sheepish. "It's Mama's favorite. She says it makes me look full of sun." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You don't need a dress for that." Ruby blushed and turned away. But something stayed with her. The voice. The boldness. That night, she wrote Clara's name in the margins of her notebook. 5 times. Then 10. Weeks passed. Their interactions grew longer. They found stolen minutes near the water pump or inside the garden shed, whispering laughter between sips of cool lemonade. Their hands brushed often, too often to be accidental. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday. Ruby had gotten soaked while closing up the chicken coop. Clara pulled her inside the tool shed and offered her dry cloth. Their eyes met too long. Ruby, lips trembling, whispered, "I think about you. More than I should." Clara's reply was slower. "Me too." No one spoke after that. Clara reached forward, careful, afraid. And Ruby leaned in. Their kiss was silent. It lasted only seconds, but rewrote every rule Ruby had ever known. They kept their love secret, wrapped in shadows and glances. They met under the magnolia tree at night, kissed behind the henhouse, held each other when the house slept. Clara began sneaking blues songs into Ruby's hands, written on paper, folded small. Ruby gave Clara poems, written in secret. But nothing good stayed hidden forever. One day, Miss Eleanor's son, Beau, spotted them holding hands in the garden. He didn't say a word, just stared. His lip curled. By sundown, the Turners had fired Clara. Rumors spread through the neighborhood like fire. People whispered about the sin, about how unnatural it was. Ruby's mama cried, begged the Lord to save her child. Clara's father struck her and told her never to come home again. The pastor preached on the evils that rot a woman's soul. Clara disappeared. Ruby searched for weeks. She asked the other house girls. She walked the back streets of Jackson. But no one would speak Clara's name. One night, unable to bear the silence, Ruby stood alone under the magnolia tree, tears spilling down her cheeks. She whispered, "Come back to me." And she waited. Nothing. Then a note came, folded into her apron at the general store. Magnolia Motel. Room 6. Midnight. Ruby's heart pounded so loud it hurt. At midnight, she crept through the shadows, every step dangerous. If someone saw them, the consequences wouldn't be shame, it would be blood. But when Clara opened the door, Ruby knew it was worth it. Clara looked thinner, tired, but her eyes still held fire. "I found work out in Memphis," she whispered. "A bar that lets me sing. Not safe, but better than here." Ruby said nothing. She only walked forward and pressed her forehead to Clara's. "I'll go," she whispered. "I'll follow you." Clara stared. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure of anything. Except you." They kissed again, hungry, desperate, real. The next morning, they boarded a bus headed north. Memphis, 1958. The world wasn't kind, but it was freer. They rented a tiny apartment above a corner grocer. Clara sang blues under a different name in a club that didn't ask too many questions. Ruby worked in a library, surrounded by books and quiet. They couldn't hold hands in public. couldn't say I love you in restaurants. But at night, in their small bed, they carved out a world where they were safe. Ruby wrote a book of poems called Songs Beneath the Magnolia Tree. It was published under a false name, but every word sang Clara's name. Years later, when queer voices were finally heard, Ruby stood at a pride parade in Chicago, now in her 60s, holding Clara's wrinkled hand. Reporters asked, "What kept you together all these years?" Clara smiled. "We never forgot the song Beneath the Tree." The church bell rang through the still Mississippi air like a judgment. It echoed over the fields, over the clapboard houses, and into the depths of Lena's bones. It had been 2 days since the fire, 2 long, haunted days since they'd burned Ruth's uncle's shed after discovering the 2 women lying tangled in each other's arms. Lena had fled barefoot, her dress torn, hair undone, the shame and fear clinging to her like sweat. Ruth, with eyes full of fury and heartbreak, had been dragged away by her cousin and hadn't been seen since. The town whispered. The town always whispered. But this time, the whispers were sharp, like broken glass under bare feet. Lena's father, a widower and a deacon, had refused to speak to her. He turned his back during supper, left early for work, and locked her in her room at night. He was silent, but his silence crushed her more than shouting ever could. Lena scratched words into the underside of her bed frame with a rusted nail. "You were a fire, Ruth. But I never minded the burn." 3 days later, at dusk, she heard tapping on her window. She pressed her face to the glass, and there was Ruth, hooded, with a bruised cheek and a cut lip, but alive. Her breath caught, and in a heartbeat, she had unlatched the window. "You shouldn't be here," Lena whispered. "If my daddy sees." "I can't stay long," Ruth said, her voice low and raspy. "They're planning to send me away. To a farm up in Georgia. I heard em say it like I was some livestock." Lena grabbed her hand. "We'll run." Ruth stared. "Where?" "Anywhere," Lena said, desperation flickering in her voice. "Chicago. New York. Someplace where we ain't just black and wrong and queer and damned." Silence. Then Ruth, defiant even now, smirked. "That sounds like a place worth finding." Escape. The 2 met again the next night. Ruth had stolen $5 from her uncle's tin box and a switchblade from a drawer. Lena had packed food and a photo of her mother, the only person she believed would have understood. They walked for hours under the veil of night, cutting through tobacco fields and overgrown paths, avoiding roads. By the time the stars had faded into a gray horizon, they'd reached the tracks, the southern railway line that, if followed, would eventually lead north. Their feet ached. Ruth's lip had cracked again. Lena's palms were blistered. But they pressed on. Every train whistle sounded like both a threat and a promise. At one point, they huddled beneath an overpass, Ruth leaning her head on Lena's shoulder. "Do you think they'll chase us?" Lena whispered. "No," Ruth replied. "They'll just pretend we never existed." Chicago, 1953. They arrived in Chicago by hitching rides and stealing moments of safety. They slept in flophouses and shelters, took janitorial jobs under fake names. Ruth worked nights at a steel plant, Lena cleaned offices, and eventually landed a job at a local bakery run by an older Creole woman who took pity on her, or maybe just saw something familiar in her silence. They shared a basement apartment with a shared bathroom and no windows. It was grimy, damp, cold, but it was theirs. They made love for the first time on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by the hum of the heater and the creak of pipes. There was no fear in their hands, only reverence. No guilt in their lips, only need. Ruth whispered, "We're here. We made it." Lena whispered back, "For now." But prejudice travels too. Even in Chicago, they weren't free. Their landlady scowled at them. "Too close," she'd mutter. "Too strange." At work, Lena overheard the other women whispering about those kinds of girls. Ruth was harassed by coworkers, accused of acting like a man, and was nearly fired after a supervisor caught her reading a book of poetry during her lunch break. Suspicious behavior, they called it. They never kissed in public. Never held hands. Their love lived behind locked doors and drawn curtains. But still, it lived. Trouble returns. One rainy evening, as Lena was closing the bakery, a familiar face stepped inside. Her heart dropped. It was her cousin Isaiah, the only one in her family who had ever been kind. But now his expression was tight, unreadable. "I heard you were here," he said. "Uncle Junior passed word. You're a ghost back home." "I'm not going back," Lena replied. Isaiah sighed, taking off his cap. "I didn't come to drag you back. Just wanted to see for myself if you were okay." "I am," she said. He nodded. "You know, they call you a lot of names now, but none of them know the truth. I don't owe them the truth." He looked at her then. "No, you don't. But you owe yourself something. You owe yourself a life where you're not always looking over your shoulder." She didn't answer. And after a pause, Isaiah left. That night, Lena told Ruth everything. "We can't keep hiding like this," Ruth said quietly. "We can't live half a life becoming known." They made a choice. They moved again to the south side, into a tiny 2-bedroom flat owned by a woman named Miss Celeste, who ran a halfway house for the unwanted. Her tenants were gay men, trans women, unwed mothers, and others with nowhere to go. Miss Celeste, a former jazz singer with silver curls and a pistol in her drawer, welcomed them with a hug and a wink. "Love is love, sugar," she said. "But the world don't like to see it in color." For the first time, Ruth and Lena found community. They danced together at nightclubs with coded names. They laughed with drag queens and wrote poems for underground publications. Ruth began sculpting. Lena started journaling, her words raw and full of longing. They were not safe, but they were seen. The price of truth. In 1955, Emmett Till was murdered. The city mourned. The South burned in rage and denial. And in their neighborhood, fear hung heavy once more. Lena wanted to join the protests. Ruth was terrified. "You don't understand what they'll do to 2 women like us if we get arrested." "I know," Lena said. "But if we stay hidden, we become exactly what they say we are, a shameful secret." They marched together. They held hands once, briefly, just enough to feel the fire between them. A photograph captured it. 2 black women, standing defiant with their fists raised. The photo was never published, but Miss Celeste hung it on her wall. Legacy. Years passed. Lena eventually opened her own bakery with Ruth's help, Ash and Honey, she called it. Ruth's sculptures began appearing in local galleries under a male pseudonym. They never had children, but they mentored dozens: artists, writers, runaways, kids who had been tossed aside for being too different. One of them, a young trans woman named Josephine, later wrote in her memoir, "I never believed love was something I'd be allowed. But then I met Ruth and Lena. And they showed me that love is a protest, a rebellion against everything that says you shouldn't exist." Final words. When Ruth died in 1997, Lena kept her ashes in a jar beside the bakery's register. And every morning, as the city woke and the ovens roared to life, Lena whispered, "You were a fire. And I still don't mind the burn."